Oh yes, that beautiful breeze, the ocean spray, all that good shit. Hello, I'm Canned Official, and welcome to my reading corner. Oh, I had to do it. That was perfect. So tonight's episode is going to have The Lady of Shadows, chapters 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully we can get through all 3. I mean, we shall see.
I say if nothing else, we should be able to get to 2.
Yeah. I think we can get through 2. Because, I mean, it's only 80 pages. We'll see. Here we go. Oh. I didn't do my ritual. My reading confidence right there. Alright. You think I should turn the beach up a little bit more? Yeah.
Hang on.
Well, right now it's very light.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Chapter 1. Detta and Odetta.
I like it.
Stripped of jargon, what Adler said was this: the perfect schizophrenic, if there was such a person, would be a man or woman not only unaware of his other personae. Is that how you say it?
I always just said personae.
Personae. But one unaware that anything at all was amiss in his or her life. Adler should have met Detta Walker and Odetta Holmes. 1. Last gunslinger, Andrew said. He had been talking for quite a while, but Andrew always talked, and Odetta usually just let it flow over her mind the way you let warm water flow over your hair and face in the shower. But this did more than catch her attention. It snagged it, as if on a thorn. I beg pardon? Oh, it was just some column in the paper, Andrew said. I don't know who wrote it. I didn't notice. One of those political fellas. Probably you'd know, Miss Holmes. I loved him, and I cried the night he was elected. She smiled, touched in spite of herself. Andrew said his ceaseless chatter was something he couldn't stop. Wasn't responsible for, that it was just the Irish in him coming out. And most of it was nothing. Cluckings and chirrupings. Chirrupings? Yeah, about relatives and friends she would never meet. Half-baked political opinions, weird scientific commentary gleaned from any number of weird sources. Among other things, Andrew was a firm believer in flying saucers, which he called UFOs. But this touched her because she had also cried the night he was elected. But I didn't cry when that son of a bitch, pardon my French, Miss Holmes, when that son of a bitch Oswald shot him. And I hadn't cried since. And it's been, what, 2 months? 3 months and 2 days, she thought. Something like that, I guess. Andrew nodded. Then I read this column in the Daily News. It might have been yesterday, about how Johnson's probably going to do a pretty good job, but it won't be the same. The guy said America had seen the passage of the world's last gunslinger. I don't think John Kennedy was that at all, Odetta said, and if her voice was sharper than the one Andrew was accustomed to hearing, which it must have been, because she saw his eyes give a startled blink in the rearview mirror, a blink that was more like a wince. It was because she felt herself touched by this, too. It was absurd. But it was also a fact. There was something about that phrase, America has seen the passage of the world's last gunslinger, that rang deeply in her mind. It was ugly. It was untrue. John Kennedy had been a peacemaker, not a leather-slapping Billy the Kid type. That was more on the Goldwater line. but it had also, for some reason, given her goosebumps. Well, the guy said there would be no shortage of shooters. Oh shit, where did my accents come from? It just flipped everywhere.
I like it though.
Well, the guy said there would be no shortage of shooters in the world. I did it again. I don't know if I should continue.
Well, the guy said there would be no shortage of shooters in the world.
There you go, that works.
Wasn't even close.
But it was fun. Andrew went on, regarding her nervously in the rearview mirror. Oh, I got it
He
now.
mentioned Jack Ruby for one, and Castro, and this fellow in Haiti.
Duvalier, she said. Papa Doc?
Yeah, him, and Diem.
The Diem brothers are dead.
Well, he said Jack Kennedy was different, that's all. He said he would draw, but only if someone weaker needed him to draw, and only if there was nothing else to do. He said Kennedy was savvy enough to know that sometimes talking don't do no good. He said Kennedy knew if it's a foaming at the mouth, you have to shoot it.
His eyes continued to regard her apprehensively.
Besides, it was just some column I read.
The limo was gliding up Fifth Avenue now, headed toward Central Park West, the Cadillac emblem on the end of the hood cutting the frigid February air. Yes, Odetta said mildly, and Andrew's eyes relaxed a trifle. I understand. I don't agree, but I understand. You are a liar, a voice spoke up in her mind. This was a voice she heard quite often. She had even named it. It was the voice of the goad. You understand perfectly and agree completely. Lie to Andrew if you feel it necessary, but for God's sake, don't lie to yourself, woman. Yet part of her protested, horrified. In a world which had become a nuclear powder keg upon which nearly 1 billion people now sat, it was a mistake, perhaps one of suicidal proportions, to believe there was a difference between good shooters and bad shooters. There were too many shaky hands holding lighters near too many fuses. This was no world for gunslingers. If there had ever been a time for them, it had passed. Hadn't it? She closed her eyes briefly and rubbed at her temples. She could feel one of her headaches coming on. Sometimes they threatened, like an ominous buildup of thunderheads on a hot summer afternoon, and then blew away, as those ugly summer brews sometimes simply slipped away in one direction or another, to stomp their thunders and lightnings into the ground of some other place. She thought, however, that this time the storm was going to happen. It would come complete with thunder, lightning, and hail the size of golf balls. The streetlights marched up Fifth Avenue seemed much too bright.
So, how was Oxford, Miss Holmes?
Andrew asked tentatively. Humid. February or not, it was very humid. She paused, telling herself she wouldn't say the words that were crowding up in her throat like bile, that she would swallow them back down. To say them would be needlessly brutal. Andrew's talk of the world's last gunslinger had been just more of a man's endless prattling. But on top of everything else, it was just a bit too much, and it came out anyway. What she had no business saying. Her voice sounded as calm and as resolute as ever, she supposed. But she was not fooled. She knew a blurt when she heard one. The bail bondsman came very promptly, of course. He had been notified in advance. They held on to us as long as they could, nevertheless, and I held on as long as I could. But I guess they won that one, because I ended up wetting myself. She saw Andrew's eyes wince away again, and she wanted to stop and couldn't stop. It's what they want to teach you, you see. Partly because it frightens you, I suppose, and a frightened person may not come down to their precious Southland to bother them again. But I think most of them, even the dumb ones, and they are all, by all means, not all dumb, know the change and will come in the end no matter what they do. And so they take the chance to degrade you while they still can. To teach you can be degraded. You can swear before God, Christ, and the whole company of saints that you will not soil yourself. But if they hold on to you long enough, of course you do. The lesson is that you're just an animal in a cage. No more than that. No better than that. Just an animal in a cage. So I wet myself. I can still smell dried urine. And that damned holding cell. They think we are descended from the monkeys, you know. And that's exactly what I smell like to myself right now. Is that all?
So do you see how the quotations didn't end at the end of that paragraph?
They didn't. That's what I'm like, what?
Yeah, that means it's continued. There's like a implied break there. A monkey.
Oh. So like it's just like a loss of time almost?
Yes, she's like that's what I feel like to myself right now. A monkey.
She saw Andrew's eyes in the rearview mirror and was sorry for the way his eyes looked. Sometimes your urine wasn't the only thing you couldn't hold.
I'm sorry, Miss Holmes.
No, she said, rubbing at her temples again. I'm the one who is sorry. It's been a trying 3 days, Andrew.
I should think so.
He said in a shocked old maidish voice that made her laugh in spite of herself. But most of her wasn't laughing. She thought she had known what she was getting into, that she had fully anticipated how bad it could get. She had been wrong. A trying 3 days. Well, that was one way to put it. Another might be that her 3 days in Oxford, Mississippi had been a short season in hell. But there were some things you couldn't say, some things you would die before saying, unless you were called upon to testify to them before the throne of God, the Father Almighty, where, she supposed, even the truths that caused the hellish thunderstorms and that strange gray jelly between your ears, the scientist said that gray jelly was nerveless. And if that wasn't a hoot and a half, she didn't know what was. Must be admitted. I just want to get home and bathe, and sleep. Then I reckon I'll be as right as rain.
Why, sure. That's just what you're going to be.
Andrew wanted to apologize for something, and this was as close as he could come. And beyond this, he didn't want to risk further conversation. So, the two of them rode in unaccustomed silence to the gray Victorian block of apartments on the corner of 5th and Central Park South. A very exclusive gray Victorian block of apartments, and she supposed that made her a blockbuster. And she knew there were people in those poshy flats who would not speak to her unless they absolutely had to. And she didn't really care. Besides, she was above them, and they knew she was above them. It had occurred to her on more than one occasion that it must have galled some of them mightily, knowing there was a person of color living in the penthouse apartment of this fine, staid old building, where once the only black hands allowed had been clad in white gloves or perhaps the thin black leather ones of a chauffeur. She hoped it did gall them mightily, and scolded herself for being mean, for being unchristian. But she did wish it. She hadn't been able to stop the piss pouring into the crotch of her fine silk imported underwear, and she didn't seem to be able to stop this other flood of piss either. It was mean. It was unchristian. And almost as bad, or worse, at least as far as the movement was concerned, it was counterproductive. They were going to win the rights they needed to win, and probably this year. Johnson, mindful of the legacy which had been left to him by the slain president, and perhaps hoping to put another nail in the coffin of Barry Goldwater, would do more than oversee the passage of the Civil Rights Act. If necessary, he would ram it into law. So it was important to minimize the scarring and the hurt. There was more work to be done. Hate would not help do that work. Hate would, in fact, hinder it. But sometimes you went on hating just the same. Oxford Town had taught her that too. 2. Detta Walker had absolutely no interest in the movement and much more modest digs. She lived in the loft of a peeling Greenwich Village apartment building. Odetta didn't know about the loft, and Detta didn't know about the penthouse, and the only one left who suspected something was not quite right as Andrew Feeney, the chauffeur. He had begun working for Odetta's father when Odetta was 14, and Detta Walker hardly existed at all. Sometimes Odetta disappeared. These disappearances might be a matter of hours or of days. Last summer, she had disappeared for 3 weeks, and Andrew had been ready to call the police when Odetta called him one evening and asked him to bring the car around at 10 the next day. She planned to do some shopping, she said. It trembled on his lips to cry out.
Miss Holmes, where have you been?
But he had asked this before and received only puzzled stares. Truly puzzled stares, he was sure, in return. Right here, she would say. Why, right here, Andrew. You've been driving me 2 or 3 places every day, haven't you? You aren't starting to go a little mushy in the head, are you? Then she would laugh, and if she was feeling especially good, as she often seemed to feel after her disappearances, she would pinch his cheek.
Very good, Miss Holmes.
He had said.
10 it is.
That scary time she had been gone for 3 weeks, Andrew had put down the phone, closed his eyes, and said a quick prayer to the Blessed Virgin for Ms. Holmes's safe return. Then he had rung Howard, the doorman at her building.
What time did she come in?
Just about 20 minutes ago, Howard
Who
said.
brought her?
Dunno. You know how it is. Different car every time. Sometimes they park around the block and I don't see him at all. Don't even know she's back until I hear the buzzer. And look out. And see her. It's her. Howard paused and added, She's got one hell of a bruise on her cheek. Howard had been right. It sure had been one hell of a bruise. And now it was getting better. Andrew didn't like to think that it might have looked like when it was Andrew didn't like to think what it might have looked like when it was fresh. Ms. Holmes appeared promptly at 10 the next morning, wearing a silk sundress with spaghetti thin straps. This had been late July. And by then the bruise had started to yellow. She had made only a perfunctory effort to cover it with makeup, as if knowing that too much effort to cover it would only draw further attention to it.
How did you get that, Miss Holmes?
He asked. She laughed merrily. You know me, Andrew, clumsy as ever. My hand slipped in the grab handle while I was getting out of the tub yesterday. I was in a hurry to catch the national news. I fell and banged the side of my face. She gauged his face. You're getting ready to start blithering about doctors and examinations, aren't you? Don't bother answering. After all these years, I can read you like a book. I won't go, so you needn't bother asking. I'm just as fine as paint. Onward, Andrew. I intend to buy half a Saks, all the Gimbals, and eat everything of 4 Seasons in between.
Yes, Miss Holmes.
He had said and smiled. It was a forced smile, and forcing it was not easy. That bruise wasn't a day old. It was a week old, at least. And he knew better. Anyway, didn't he? He had called her every night at 7 o'clock for the last week, because if there was one time when you could catch Ms. Holmes in her place, it was when the Huntley Brinkley report came on. A regular junkie for her news was Ms. Holmes. He had done it every night, that was, except last night. Then he had gone over and wheeled that passkey from Howard. A conviction had been growing on him steadily. that she had just the sort of accident she had described. Only instead of getting a bruise or a broken bone, she had died alone, and was lying up there dead right now. He had let himself in, heart thumping, feeling like a cat in a dark room crisscrossed with piano wires. Only there had been nothing to be nervous about. There was a butter dish on the kitchen counter, and although the butter had been covered, it had been out long enough to be growing a good crop of mold. He got there at 10 minutes of 7 and had left by 5 after. In the course of his quick examination of the apartment, he had glanced into the bathroom. The tub had been dry, the towels neatly, even austerely arrayed. The room's many grab handles polished to a bright steel gleam that was unspotted with water. He knew the accident she had described had not happened, but Andrew had not believed she was lying either. She had believed what she had told him. He looked in the rearview mirror again and saw her rubbing her temples lightly with the tips of her fingers. He didn't like it. He had seen her do that too many times before one of her disappearances. 3. Andrew left the motor running. Let's switch this over. There we go. Turn this one down a little bit. Andrew left the motor running so she could have the benefit of the heater, then went around to the trunk. He looked at her 2 suitcases with another wince. It looked as if petulant men with small minds and large bodies had kicked them relentlessly back and forth, damaging the bags in a way they did not quite dare damage Miss Holmes herself. And the way they might have damaged him, for instance, if he had been there. It was just that she was a woman.
Wasn't.
Huh?
It wasn't.
It wasn't just that she was a woman. She was a person of color. An uppity northern black lady messing where she had no business messing. And they probably figured a woman like that deserved just what she got. Thing was, she was also a rich black person. Thing was, she was almost as well known to the American public as Medgar Evers or Martin Luther King. Thing was, she'd gotten her rich black face on the cover of Time magazine, and it was a little harder to get away with sticking someone like that in the toolies and then saying, What?
What? No, sir,
there you go.
boss. We sure didn't see nobody like that down here, did we, boys?
Thing was, it was a little harder to work yourself up to hurting a woman who was the only heir to Holmes Dental Industries when there were 12 Holmes plants in the sunny South. One of them just 1 county over from Oxford Town. So they'd done to her suitcases what they didn't dare do to her. He looked at these mute indications of her stay in Oxford Town with shame and fury and love, emotions as mute as the scars on the luggage that had gone away looking smart and had come back looking dumb and thumped. He looked, temporarily unable to move, and his breath puffed out on the frosty air. Howard was coming out to help, but Andrew paused a moment longer before grasping the handles of the cases.
Who are you, Miss Holmes? Who are you really? Where do you go sometimes? And what do you do that seems so bad you have to make up a false history of the missing hours or days even to yourself?
And he thought something else in the moment before Howard arrived, something weirdly apt.
Where's the rest of you? You want to quit thinking like that. If anyone around here was going to do any thinking like that, it would be Miss Holmes. And she doesn't. And so you don't need to either.
Andrew lifted the bags out of the trunk and handed them to Howard, who was asking in a low voice, Is she all right?
I think so.
Andrew replied, also pitching his voice low.
Just tired is all. Tired all the way down to her roots.
Howard nodded, took the battered suitcases, and started back inside. He paused only long enough to tip his cap to Odetta Holmes, who was almost invisible behind the smoked glass windows, in a soft and respectful salute. When he was gone, Andrew took out the collapsed stainless steel scaffolding at the bottom of the trunk and began to unfold it. It was a wheelchair. Since August 19th, 1959, some 5.5 years before, the part of Odetta Holmes from the knees down had been as missing as those blank hours and days. 4. Before the subway incident, Detta Walker had only been conscious a few times. These were like coral islands, which looked isolated to one above them, but are, in fact, only nodes in the spine of a long archipelago, which is mostly underwater. Odetta suspected Detta not at all, and Detta had no idea that there was such a person as Odetta. But Detta at least had a clear understanding that something was wrong, that someone was fucking with her life. Odetta's imagination novelized all sorts of things which had happened when Detta was in charge of her body. Detta was not so clever. She thought she remembered things, some things at least, but a lot of the time, she didn't. Detta was at least partially aware of the blanks. She could remember the china plate. She could remember that. She could remember slipping it into the pocket of her dress, looking over her shoulder all the while to make sure the blue woman wasn't there, peeking. She had to make sure because the china plate belonged to the blue woman. The china plate was, Detta understood in some vague way, for special. Detta took it for that way. Detta took it for that why. Detta remembered taking it to a place she knew, although she didn't know how she knew, as the drawers, a smoking, trash-littered hole in the earth where she had once seen a burning baby with plastic skin. She remembered putting the plate carefully down on the gravelly ground and then started to step on it and stopping. Remembered taking off her plain cotton panties and putting them into the pocket where the plate had been, and then carefully slipping. Hey, Jack, I need you to go to your room, please. Go to your room. I don't want you to hear this. Go to your room. Huh? Not long. You can go hang out with Mom.
Come on now. We're talking about lady parts here.
All right. Lord.
Yeah, about to get X-ray.
About to get lit. Somebody is.
This part where the writing is done from Detta's perspective, like everything's a run-on sentence. Everything's like a tiny part of the next part, and it just like the way that he wrote it, it's all just like almost
continual
like stream of consciousness thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I will try this. Or are you going to attack it?
You notice like there's this one paragraph.
Yes. It's fucking huge.
It's one paragraph all the way to the end of like where she stops thinking.
Oh, it's actually indented. Because if you look at the beginning of 4, hold on, so I can see myself. So if you look at the beginning of 4, it goes down,
solid.
And it has an indentation right here at the end for 2 different lines.
Yep.
Then it's the fucking same.
And then it just because it's like this is like a memory.
It's droning
it's
on.
Like her like thinking back. All right,
All right,
Get ready.
bud. I hope I've been doing all right. I've had to censor some words.
Yes, you've been doing the right thing.
All right. She remembered putting the plate carefully down on the gravelly ground and then starting to step on it and stopping. Remembered taking off her plain cotton panties and putting them into the pocket where the plate had been, and then carefully slipping the first finger of her left hand carefully against the cut in her at the place where the old stupid god had joined her and all other girls and women imperfectly. But something about that place must be right, because she remembered the jolt, remembered wanting to press, remembered not pressing, remembered how delicious her vagina had been naked, without the cotton panties in the way of it in the world. And she had not pressed, not until her shoe pressed, her black patent leather shoe, not until her shoe pressed down on the plate. Then she pressed on the cut with her finger, the way she was pressing on the blue woman's four special china plate with her foot. She remembered the way the black patent leather shoe covered the delicate blue webbing on the edge of the plate. She remembered the press. Yes, she remembered pressing in the drawers, pressed with finger and foot. Remembered the delicious promise of finger and cut. Remembered that when the plate snapped with a bitter brittle snap, and similar brittle pleasure had skewered upward from that cut into her guts like an arrow. She remembered the cry which had broken from her lips, an unpleasant cawing like the sound of a crow scared up from a corn patch. She could remember staring dully at the fragments of the plate, and then taking the plain white cotton panties slowly out of her dress pocket and putting them on again. Step-ins. So she had heard them called, and sometime unhoused in memory and drifting loose like turves on a flood tide. Step-ins. Good. Because first you stepped out to do your business, and then you stepped back in. First one shiny patent leather shoe, and then the other. Good. Panties were good. She could remember drawing them up her legs so clearly, drawing them past her knees, a scab on the left one almost ready to fall off and leave clean pink new baby skin. Yes. She could remember so clearly it might not have been a week ago or yesterday, but only one single moment ago. She could remember how the waistband had reached the hem of her party dress, the clear contrast of white cotton against brown skin, like cream. Yes, like that. Cream from a pitcher caught suspended over coffee, the texture, the panties disappearing under the hem of the dress, except then the dress was burnt or orange, and the panties were not going up but down, but they were still white but not cotton. They were nylon. Cheap see-through nylon panties, cheap in more ways than one, and she remembered stepping out of them. She remembered how they glimmered on the floor mat of the 46 Dodge DeSoto. Yes, how white they were, how cheap they were. Not anything dignified like underwear, but cheap panties. The girl was cheap, and it was good to be cheap, good to be on sale, good to be on the block, not even like a whore, but like a good breed sow. She remembered. No round china plate, but the round white face of a boy. Some surprised drunk fraternity boy. He was no china plate, but his face was as round as the blue woman's china plate had been, and there was webbing on his cheeks. And this webbing looked as blue as the webbing on the blue woman's four special china plate had been. But that was only because the neon was red. The neon was garish. In the dark, the neon from the roadhouse sign made the spreading blood from the places on his cheeks where she had clawed him look blue. And he had said, Why did you do? And then he unrolled the window so he could get his face outside to puke. And she remembered hearing Dodie Stevens on the jukebox singing about tan shoes with pink shoelaces and a big Panama with a purple hat band. She remembered the sound of his puking was like gravel in a cement mixer, and his penis, which moments before had been a livid exclamation point rising from the tufted tangle of his pubic hair, was collapsing into a weak white question mark. She remembered the hoarse gravel sounds of his vomiting stopped and then started again, and she thought, well, I guess he ain't made enough to lay this foundation yet, and laughing and pressing her finger, which now came equipped with a long shaped nail, against her vagina, which was bare but no longer bare because it was overgrown with its own coarse briar tangle. And there had been the same brittle breaking snap inside her, and it was still as much pain as it was pleasure, but better, far better than nothing at all. And then he was grabbing blindly for her and saying in a heart-breaking tone, "Oh, you goddamn cunt!" And she went on laughing just the same, dodging him easily, and snatched up her panties and opened the door on her side of the car, feeling the last blind thud of his fingers on the back of her blouse as she ran into a May night that was redolent of early honeysuckle. Red pink neon light stuttering off the gravel of some post-war parking lot, stuffing her panties, her cheap slick nylon panties, not into the pocket of her dress, but into a purse jumbled with a teenager's cheerful conglomeration of cosmetics. She was running. The light was stuttering. And then she was 23, and it was not panties, but a rayon scarf. And she was casually slipping it into her purse as she walked along a counter in the nice notion section of Macy's. A scarf which sold at that time for $1.99. Cheap. Cheap like the white nylon panties. Cheap like her. The body she inhabited was that of a woman who had inherited millions, but that was not known and didn't matter. The scarf was white, the edging blue, and there was that same little breaking sense of pleasure as she sat in the back seat of the taxi and, oblivious of the driver, held the scarf in one hand, looking at it fixedly, while her other hand crept up under the tweed skirt and beneath the leg band of her white panties. And that one long, dark finger took care of the business that needed to be taken care of in a single, merciless stroke. So sometimes she wondered, in a distracted sort of way, where she was when she wasn't here. But mostly her needs were too sudden and pressing for any extended contemplation, and she simply fulfilled what needed to be fulfilled, did what needed to be done. Roland would have understood. 5.
Hang on.
Okay.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Steve.
Hello, y'all.
Just want to say hello.
I
Nick, hi,
finished
Steve.
chapter 3.
Oh,
Nice.
oh, you went through the whole... oh, yeah, that chapter 3. Okay.
I have to listen to you,
Gotcha.
and then maybe understand what the hell's going on.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's a little confusing a little sometimes. All right. Here, 8, 5.
If you want to do any voices, actually, you probably don't have the book. Never mind.
No, I don't.
That'd make it easier to know your lines and stuff.
It would. Just a little bit.
I'll read off your book.
Yeah, I'll just do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I picked up a new set for like $70 on Amazon.
Yeah, I think it went up to 80.
$100 for you.
800, yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. We are on sub-chapter 5 of the first chapter
Yeah.
of The Lady of Shadows.
Okay.
Odetta could have taken a limo everywhere, even in 1959. Although her father was still alive and she was not as fabulously rich as she would become when he died in 1962, the money held in trust for her had become hers on her 25th birthday, and she could do pretty much as she liked. But she cared very little for a phrase one of the conservative columnists had coined a year or two before. The phrase was limousine liberal, and she was young enough not to want to be seen as one, even if she really was one. Not young enough or stupid enough to believe that a few pairs of faded jeans and the khaki skirts or shirts she habitually wore in any real way changed her essential status, or riding the bus or the subway when she could have used the car. But she had been self-involved enough not to see Andrew's hurt in deep puzzlement. He liked her and thought it must be some sort of personal rejection, but young enough to still believe that gesture could sometimes overcome, or at least overset, truth. Hi, Mushy. On the night of August 19th, 1959, she paid for the gesture with half her legs and half her mind. 6. Odetta had been first tugged, then pulled, and finally caught up in the swell, which would eventually turn into a tidal wave. In 1957, when she became involved, the thing which eventually became known as the movement had no name. She knew some of the background, knew the struggle for equality had gone on not since the Emancipation Proclamation, but almost since the first boatload of slaves had been brought to America, to Georgia, in fact, the colony of the British founded to get rid of their criminals and debtors. But for Odetta, it always seemed to begin in the same place, with the same 3 words: I'm not moving. The place had been a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and the words had been spoken by a black woman named Rosa Lee Parks. And the place from which Rosa Lee Parks was not moving was from the front of the city bus to the back of the city bus, which was, of course, the Jim Crow part of the city bus. Night, Peepops. Take care of that baby. Much later, Odetta would sing, "We shall not be moved," with the rest of them, and it always made her think of Rosa Lee Parks, and she never sang it without a sense of shame. It was so easy to sing "we" with your arms linked to the arms of a whole crowd. That was easy even for a woman with no legs. So easy to sing "we." So easy to be "we." There had been no "we" on that bus, and that bus that must have stank of ancient leather and years of cigar and cigarette smoke. That bus with the curved ad cards saying things like "Lucky Strike." LSMFT, and attend the church of your choice for heaven's sake, and drink Ovaltine. You'll see what we mean. And Chesterfield, 21 great tobaccos made 21 wonderful smokes. No, we, under the disbelieving gazes of the motorman, the white passengers among whom she sat, the equally disbelieving stares of the blacks at the back. No we, no marching thousands, only Rosa Lee Parks starting a tidal wave with 3 words: I'm not moving. Odetta would think, if I could do something like that, if I could be that brave, I think I could be happy for the rest of my life. But that sort of courage is not in me. She had read of the Parks incident, but with little interest at first. That came little by little. It was hard to say exactly when or how her imagination had been caught and fired by that, at first almost soundless racequake, which had begun to shake the South. A year or so later, a young man she was dating more or less regularly began taking her down to the village, where some of the young and mostly white folk singers who performed there had added some new and startling songs to their repertoire. Suddenly, in addition to all those old wheezes about how John Henry had taken his hammer and outraced the new steam hammer, killing himself in the process, Lord, and how Barbary Allen had cruelly rejected her lovesick young suitor and ended up dying of shame, Lord. There were songs about how it felt to be down and out and ignored in the city, how it felt to be turned away from a job you could do because your skin was the wrong color, how it felt to be taken into a jail cell and whipped by Mr. Charlie because your skin was dark, and you had dared, Lord, to sit in the white folks' section of the lunch counter at an F.W. Woolworth's in Montgomery, Alabama. Absurdly or not, it was only then that she had become curious about her own parents, and their parents, and their parents before them. She would never read Roots. She was in another world and time long before that book was written, perhaps even thought of by Alex Haley. Or Hallie. But it was at this absurdly late time in her life when it first dawned upon her that not so many generations back, her progenitors had been taken in chains by white men. Surely the fact had occurred to her before, but only as a piece of information with no real temperature gradient, like an equation, never as something which bore intimately upon her own life. Odetta totted up what she knew and was appalled by the smallness of the sun. She knew her mother had been born in Odetta, Arkansas, the town for which she, the only child, had been named. She knew her father had been a small-town dentist who had invented and patented a capping process which had lain dormant and unremarked for 10 years and which had then, suddenly, made him a moderately wealthy man. She knew that he had developed a number of other dental processes during the 10 years before and the 4 years after the influx of wealth, most of them either orthodontic or cosmetic in nature, and that shortly after moving to New York with his wife and daughter, who had been born 4 years after the original patent had been secured, he had founded a company called Holmes Dental Industries, which was now to teeth. To teeth what Squibb was to shit. Holmes Dental Industries, which was now to teeth what Squibb was to antibiotics. When she asked him what life had been like during all the years between, the years when she hadn't been there and the years when she had, her father wouldn't tell her. He would say all sorts of things, but he wouldn't tell her anything. He closed that part of himself off to her. Once her ma, Alice. He called her ma, or sometimes Allie if he'd had a few or was feeling good, said, "Tell her about the time those men shot at you when you drove the Ford through the covered bridge, Dan." And he gave Odetta's ma such a gray and forbidding look at her ma, that her ma, always something of a sparrow, had shrunk back in her seat and said no more. Odetta had tried her mother once or twice, alone after that night, but to no avail. If she had tried before, she might have gotten something, but because he wouldn't speak, she wouldn't speak either. And to him, she realized the past, those relatives, those red dirt roads, those stores, those dirt floor cabins with glassless windows ungraced by a single simple curtsy of a curtain, those incidents of hurt and harassment, those neighbor children who went dressed in smocks which had begun life as flour sacks. All of that was for him, buried away like dead teeth beneath perfect blinding white caps. He would not speak, perhaps could not, and perhaps willingly afflicted himself with a selective amnesia. The capped teeth was their life in the Gray Marl apartments on Central Park South. All else was hidden beneath that impervious outer cover. His past was so well protected that there had been no gap to slide through, no way past that perfect capped barrier and into the throat of revelation. Detta knew things, but Detta didn't know Odetta, and Odetta didn't know Detta. Shit. But, let me start that over. Blah, blah, blah. Detta knew things, but Detta didn't know Odetta, and Odetta didn't know Detta. And so the teeth lay as smooth and closed as a redan. Is it redan like that?
Yep.
Redan gate there, also. She had some of her mother's shyness in her as well as her father's unblinking, if unspoken, toughness. And the only time she had dared pursue him further on the subject to suggest that what he was denying her was a deserved trust fund never promised and apparently never to mature. Had been one night in his library. He had shaken his Wall Street journal carefully, closed it, folded it, and laid it aside on the deal table beside the standing lamp. He had removed his rimless steel spectacles and had laid them on top of the paper. Then he had looked at her, a thin black man, thin almost to the point of emaciation, tightly kinked gray hair now drawing rapidly away from the deepening hollows of his temples, where tender clock springs of veins pulsed steadily, and he had said
I don't talk about that part of my life, Odetta, or think about it. It would be pointless. The world has moved on since then.
Roland would have understood. 7.
Beach. No, city.
Okay. When Roland opened the door with the words, "The Lady of the Shadows" written upon it, he saw things he did not understand at all, but he understood they didn't matter. It was Eddie Dean's world, but beyond that, it was only a confusion of lights, people and objects, more objects than he had ever seen in his life. Lady things, from the look of them, and apparently for sale. Some under glass, some arranged in tempting piles and displays. None of it mattered any more than the movement as that world flowed past the edges of the doorway before them. The doorway was the lady's eyes. He was looking through them just as he had looked through Eddie's eyes when Eddie had moved up the aisle of the sky carriage. Eddie, on the other hand, was thunderstruck. The revolver in his hand trembled and dropped a little. The gunslinger could have taken it from him easily, but did not. He only stood quietly. It was a trick he had learned a long time ago. Now the view through the doorway made one of those turns the gunslinger found so dizzying, but Eddie found this same abrupt swoop oddly comforting. Roland had never seen a movie. Eddie had seen thousands, and what he was looking at was like one of those moving point-of-view shots they did in ones like Halloween and The Shining. He even knew what they called the gadget they did it with. Steadicam. That was it.
Star Wars 2.
He muttered.
Death Star. That's fucking crack. Remember?
Roland looked at him and said nothing. Hands, dark brown hands, entered what Roland saw as a doorway and what Eddie was already starting to think of as some sort of magic movie screen. A movie screen which, under the right circumstances, you might be able to walk into the way that guy had just walked out of the screen and into the real world in the purple rose of Cairo. Bitchin' movie. Eddie hadn't realized how bitchin' it was until just now. Except that movie hadn't been made yet on the other side of the door he was looking through. It was New York, okay. Somehow the very sound of the taxicab horns, as mute and faint as they were, proclaimed that, and it was some New York department store he had been in at one time or another. But it was.
It's older,
he muttered. Before your win? The gunslinger asked. Eddie looked at him and laughed shortly.
Yeah, if that's the way you want to put it, yeah.
Hello, Miss Walker, a tentative voice said. The view in the doorway rose so suddenly that even Eddie was a bit dizzied, and he saw a saleswoman who obviously knew the owner of the black hands. Knew her and either didn't like her or feared her, or both. Help you today? Do you want to do Detta?
No, I'll do the saleswoman.
Okay, all right.
I didn't realize there was another, like, it was with a character. You've been
I
doing
didn't
that
either.
this whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
This one.
Help you today?
This one. The owner of the black hands held up a white scarf with a bright blue edge. Don't bother to wrap it up, babe. Just stick it in a bag.
Cash or?
Cash. It's always cash, isn't it?
Yes, that's fine, Miss Walker.
I'm so glad you approve, dear. Is that that's Detta. That's Detta, right?
No. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Dada. Sorry. Yes.
There was a little grimace on the salesgirl's face. Eddie just caught it as she turned away. Maybe it was something as simple as being talked to that way by a woman the salesgirl considered an uppity black girl. Again, it was more his experience in movie theaters than any knowledge of history or even life on the streets as he had lived it that caused this thought. Because this was like watching a movie either set or made in the 60s. Something like that one with Sidney Steiger and Rod Portier in the heat of the night. But it could also be something even simpler. Roland's Lady of the Shadows was black or white. One rude bitch. And it didn't really matter, did it? None of it made a damned bit of difference. He cared about one thing, and one thing only, and that was getting the fuck out. That was New York. He could almost smell New York. And New York meant smack. He could almost smell that too. Except there was a hitch, wasn't there? One big motherfucker of a hitch. 8. Roland watched Eddie carefully, and although he could have killed him 6 times over at almost any time he wanted, he had elected to remain still and silent and let Eddie work the situation out for himself. Eddie was a lot of things, and a lot of them were not nice. As a fellow who had consciously let a child drop to his death, the gunslinger knew the difference between nice and not quite well. But one thing Eddie wasn't was stupid. He was a smart kid. He would figure it out. So he did. He looked back at Roland, smiled without showing his teeth, twirled the gunslinger's revolver once on his finger, clumsily, burlesquing a show shooter's fancy coda, and then he held it out to Roland, butt first.
This thing might as well be a piece of shit for all the good it can do me. Isn't that right?
You can talk bright when you want to, Roland thought. Why do you so often choose to talk stupid, Eddie? Is it because you think that's the way they talked in the place where your brother went with his guns?
Isn't that right?
Eddie repeated. Roland nodded.
If I had plugged you, what would have happened to that door?
I don't know. I suppose the only way to find out would be to try it and see.
Well, what do you think would happen?
I think it would disappear. Eddie nodded. That was what he thought. He agreed. Poof. Gone like magic. Now you see it, my friends. Now you don't. It was really no different than what would happen if the projectionist in a movie theater were to draw a 6-shooter and plug the projector. Was it? If you shot the projector, the movie stopped. Eddie didn't want the picture to stop. Eddie wanted his money's worth.
You can go through by yourself.
Eddie said slowly. Yes.
Sort of.
Yes?
You wind up in a head, like you wound up in mine.
Yeah?
So you can hitchhike into my world, but that's all.
Roland said nothing. Hitchhike was one of the words Eddie sometimes used that he didn't exactly understand, but he caught the drift.
But you could go through in your body, like at Balazar's.
He was talking out loud, but really talking to himself.
Except you'd need me for that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Then take me with you.
The gunslinger opened his mouth, but Eddie was already rushing on.
Not now. I don't mean now.
He said.
I know it would cause a riot or some goddamn thing if we just popped out over there.
He laughed rather wildly.
Like a magician pulling rabbits out of a hat, except without any hat. Sure I did. We'll wait until she's alone, and...
No,
I'll come back with you.
Eddie said.
I swear it, Roland. I mean, I know you got a job to do, and I know I'm part of it. I know you saved my ass at customs, but I think I saved yours at Balazar's. Now what do you think?
I think you did, Roland said. He remembered the way Eddie had risen up from behind the desk, regardless of the risk, and felt an instant of doubt. But only an instant.
So, Peter pays Paul. One hand washes the other. All I want to do is go back for a few hours, grab some takeout chicken, maybe a box of Dunkin' Donuts.
Eddie nodded toward the doorway, where things had begun to move again.
So what do you say?
No, the gunslinger said. But for a moment he was hardly thinking about Eddie. That movement up the aisle, the lady, whoever she was, wasn't moving the way an ordinary person moved. Wasn't moving, for instance, the way Eddie had moved when Roland looked through his eyes. Or, now that he stopped to think of it, which he never had before, any more than he had ever stopped and really noticed the constant presence of his own nose in the lower range of his peripheral vision. The way he moved himself. When one walked, vision became a mild pendulum. Left leg, right leg, left leg, right leg, the world rocking back and forth so mildly and gently that after a while, shortly after you began to walk, he supposed you simply ignored it. There was none of that pendulum movement in the lady's walk. She simply moved smoothly up the aisle, as if riding along tracks. Ironically, Eddie had had this same perception. Only to Eddie it had looked like a Steadicam shot. He had found this perception comforting because it was familiar. For Roland, it was alien. But then Eddie was breaking in, his voice shrill.
Well, why not? Just why the fuck not?
Because you don't want chicken, the gunslinger said. I know what you call the things you want, Eddie. You want to fix. You want to score.
So what?
Eddie cried, almost shrieked.
So what if I do? I said I'd come back with you. You got my promise. I mean, you got my fucking promise. What else do you want? Do you want me to swear on my mother's name? Okay, I swear on my mother's name. Do you want me to swear on my brother Henry's name? All right, I swear, I swear, I swear.
Enrico Balazar would have told him, but the gunslinger didn't need the likes of Balazar to tell him one fact of life. This one fact of life. Never trust a junkie. Roland nodded toward the door. Until after the tower, at least, that part of your life is done. After that, I don't care. After that, you're free to go to hell in your own way. Until then, I need you.
Oh, you fucking shit-ass liar.
Eddie said softly. There was no audible emotion in his voice, but the gunslinger saw the glisten of tears in his eyes. Roland said nothing.
You know there ain't gonna be no after. Not for me, not for her, or whoever the Christ this third guy is. Probably not for you either. You look as fucking wasted as Henry did at his worst. If we don't die on the way to your tower, I'm sure as shit we'll die when we get there, so why are you lying to me?
The gunslinger felt a dull species of shame, but only repeated, At least for now, that part of your life is done.
Yeah?
Eddie said.
Well, I got some news for you, Roland. I know what's going to happen to your real body when you go through there and inside of her. I know because I saw it before. I don't need your guns. I got you by that fabled place where the short hairs grow, my friend. You can even turn her head the way you turned mine and watch what I do to the rest of you while you're nothing but your goddamn car. I'd like to wait until nightfall and drag you down by the water. Then you can watch the lobsters chow up on the rest of you. But you might be in too much of a hurry for that.
Eddie paused. The grating breaking of the waves and the steady hollow conch of the wind both seemed very loud.
So, I think I'll just use your knife to cut your throat.
And close that door forever?
You say that part of my life is done. You don't just mean smack either. You mean New York, America, my time, everything. If that's how it is, I want this part done too. The scenery sucks and the company stinks. There are times, Roland, when you make Jimmy Swaggart look almost sane.
There are great wonders ahead, Roland said. Great adventures. More than that, there is a quest to course upon, and a chance to redeem your honor. There's something else, too. You could be a gunslinger. I needn't be the last after all. It's in you, Eddie. I see it. I feel it. Eddie laughed, although now the tears were coursing down his cheeks.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Just what I need. My brother Henry, he was a gunslinger. In a place called Vietnam, that was. It was great for him. You should have seen him when he was on a serious nod, Roland. He couldn't find his way to the fucking bathroom without help. If there was any help handy, he just sat there and watched the big time wrestling and did it in his fucking pants. It's great to be a gunslinger, I can see that. My brother was a doper and you're out of your fucking gourd.
Perhaps your brother was a man with no clear idea of honor.
Maybe not. We didn't always get a real clear picture of what that was in the projects. It was just a word you used after if you got caught. You happened to get caught smoking reefer or hitting the spinners off some guy's T-bird and get held up for court for it.
Eddie was crying harder now, but he was laughing too.
You're friends now. This guy you talk about in your sleep, for instance, this dude Cuthbert.
The gunslinger started, in spite of himself. Not all his long years of training could stay that start.
Did they get this stuff you're talking about? Like a goddamn Marine recruiting sergeant? Adventure, quest, honor?
They understood honor, yes, Roland said slowly, thinking of all the vanished others.
Did it get them any further than gunslinging got my brother?
The gunslinger said nothing.
I know you.
Eddie said.
I've seen lots of guys like you. You're just another kook singing onward Christian soldiers with a flag in one hand and a gun in the other. I don't want no honor. I just want a chicken dinner and a fix, in that order. So I'm telling you, go on through. You can, but the minute you're gone, I'm gonna kill the rest of you.
The gunslinger said nothing. Eddie smiled crookedly and brushed the tears from his cheeks with the backs of his hands.
You want to know what we call this back home?
What?
A Mexican standoff.
For a moment, they only looked at each other, and then Roland looked sharply into the doorway. They had both been partially aware, Roland rather more than Eddie, that there had been another of those swerves, this time to the left. Here was an array of sparkling jewelry. Some was under protective glass, but because most wasn't, the gunslinger supposed it was trumpery stuff. What Eddie would have called costume jewelry. The dark brown hands examined a few things in what seemed an only cursory manner, and then another salesgirl appeared. There had been some conversation which neither of them really noticed, and the lady, some lady, Eddie thought, asked to see something else. The salesgirl went away, and that was when Roland's eyes swung sharply back. The brown hands reappeared, only now they held a purse. It opened. Here, fix the audio. The brown hands reappeared, only now they had held a purse. It opened, and suddenly the hands were scooping things, seemingly, almost certainly at random, into the purse.
Well, you're collecting quite a crew, Roland.
Eddie said, bitterly amused.
First, you got your basic white junkie, and then you got your basic black shoplift.
But Roland was already moving toward the doorway between the worlds, moving swiftly, not looking at Eddie at all.
I mean it!
Eddie screamed.
You go through and I'll cut your throat. I'll cut your fucking throat.
Before he could finish, the gunslinger was gone. All that was left of him was his limp, breathing body lying upon the beach. For a moment, Eddie only stood there, unable to believe that Roland had done it, had really gone ahead and done this idiotic thing in spite of his promise, his sincere fucking guarantee, as far as that went, of what the consequences would be. He stood for a moment, eyes rolling like the eyes of a frightened horse at the onset of a thunderstorm. Except, of course, there was no thunderstorm except for the one in the head. All right, all right. God damn it. There might only be a moment. That was all the gunslinger might give him. And Eddie damned well knew it. He glanced at the door and saw the black hands freeze, with the gold necklace half in and half out of a purse that already glittered like a pirate's cache of treasure. Although he could not hear it, Eddie sensed that Roland was speaking to the owner of the black hands. He pulled the knife from the gunslinger's purse and then rolled over the limp, breathing body, which lay before the doorway. The eyes were open but blank, rolled up to the whites. Unmute.
I don't know, maybe it was the...
Oh, I guess because you screamed it.
What, Roland?
Eddie screamed. That monotonous, idiotic, never-ending wind blew in his ears. Christ. It was enough to drive anyone bug shit.
Watch very closely. I want to complete your fucking education. I want to show you what happens when you fuck over the Dean brothers.
He brought the knife down to the gunslinger's throat. Chapter 2.
It's 11:10.
It is 11:10.
Just check.
This is a much smaller chapter.
It is, actually, yeah, we can definitely get this one done. I'm actually pretty sure the other one's not that long either. Okay, it is a little bit longer.
Shit.
It's about twice as long as this next one.
Okay.
We can definitely get this next one done. So
Chapter 2.
Roll on 2.
Ringing the changes. 1. August 1959. When the intern came outside half an hour later, he found Julio leaning against the ambulance, which was still parked in the emergency bay of the Sisters of Mercy Hospital on 23rd Street. The heel of
city noises.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bustling city.
Give us the city.
New Orleans Noir. It's
Yeah, that might have some
1920s.
sound. Play it. Skip it. You need like Dark City would be great.
Cotton Club. That's 20s too. Where's it at? Dark City?
Yeah. Oh
Dark-
wait, they've got. Never mind.
Dark
They've
City.
got music. You need just
Yes.
just ambience. Wish you could
Ambience.
just turn that off.
Well, that's Victorian London. Oh shit. City in the city.
Minimal music, it says. Yeah, that's good.
It's perfect. How's the levels on this? All right, maybe you can come up just a hair.
This is a good chapter. There's going to be a couple of different
Sensors.
yeah, that, but two characters, Julio and George.
George Shavers.
I'll be George, I guess.
All right. I might change Julio's. How Julio speaks. I don't know. August 1959. When the intern came outside half an hour later, he found Julio leaning against the ambulance, which was still parked in the emergency bay of Sisters of Mercy Hospital on 23rd Street. The heel of one of Julio's pointy-toed boots was hooked over the front fender. He had changed to a pair of glaring pink pants and a blue shirt with his name written in gold stitches over the left pocket. His bowling league outfit. George checked his watch and saw that Julio's team, the Spics of Supremacy, would already be rolling.
Thought you'd be gone.
George Shavers said. He was an intern at Sisters of Mercy.
How are you guys gonna win without the Wonder Hook?
How would Julio sound?
He's probably Puerto Rican. Nope, Cubano.
Cuba.
Cuban.
Fuck. Nothing's coming to mind.
Do it like Giancarlo Esposito.
Fuck.
Okay. Gus.
Drawing a blank.
Gus from. He's the bad guy in Far Cry 6.
I know who. Yes, I know who you're talking about.
Do it like. Who else? Guys, like, wait. It's a Hispanic accent, but it's like, Cuban. Did you ever watch Dexter?
A little bit. I'll try to do something.
Just slightly Spanish.
They got Miguel Basala to take my place. He ain't steady, but he gets hot sometimes. They'll be okay. Julio paused.
Great.
I was curious about how it came out. He was the driver, a Cubano with a sense of humor. George wasn't even sure Julio knew he had. He'd looked around. Neither of the paramedics who rode with them were in sight.
Where are they?
George asked. Oh, the fucking Bubsy twins? What do you think they are? Chasing Minnesota poontang down in the village. Any idea if she'll pull through?
Don't know.
He tried to sound sage and knowing about the known. But the fact was that first the resident on duty, and then a pair of surgeons had taken the black woman away from him almost faster than you can say Hail Mary full of grace, which had actually been on his lips to say. The black lady really hadn't looked as if she was going to last very long.
She lost a hell of a lot of blood.
No shit. George was one of the 16 interns at Sisters of Mercy, and one of the 8 assigned to a new program called Emergency Ride. The theory was that an intern riding with a couple of paramedics could sometimes make the difference between life and death in an emergency situation. George knew that most drivers and paras thought that wet behind the ears interns were as likely to kill red blankets as save them. But George thought maybe it worked. Sometimes. Either way, it made great PR for the hospital, and although the interns in the program liked to bitch about the extra 8 hours without pay it entailed each week, George Shavers sort of thought most of them felt the way he did himself. Proud, tough, able to take whatever they threw his way. Then had come the night the TWA TriStar crashed at Idlewild. 65 people on board, 60 of them what Julio Estevez referred to as DRT, dead right there. And 3 of the remaining 5 looked like the sort of thing you might scrape out of the bottom of a coal furnace. Except what you scraped out of the bottom of a coal furnace didn't moan and shriek and beg for someone to give them morphine or kill them, did they?
If you can take this,
he thought afterward, remembering the severed limbs lying amid the remains of aluminum flaps and seat cushions, and a ragged chunk of tail with the numbers 17 and a big red letter T and part of a W on it. Remembering the eyeball he had seen resting on top of the charred Samsonite suitcase. Remembering a child's teddy bear with staring shoe button eyes looking beside a small red sneaker with a child's foot still in it.
You can take this, baby. You can take anything.
And he had been taking it just fine. He went right on taking it just fine all the way home. He went on taking it just fine through a late supper that consisted of a Swanson's turkey TV dinner. He went to sleep with no problem at all, which proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was taking it just fine. Then, in some dead dark hour of the morning, he had awakened from a hellish nightmare in which the thing resting on top of the charred Samsonite suitcase had not been a teddy bear, but his mother's head. And her eyes had opened, and they had been charred. They were the staring, expressionless, shoe-button eyes of a teddy bear, and her mouth had opened, revealing the broken fangs which had been her dentures up until the TWA TriStar was struck by lightning on its final approach. And she had whispered, "You couldn't save me, George. We scribbed for you. We saved for you. We went without for you. Your dad fixed up the scrape you got into with that girl, and you still couldn't save me. God damn you." And he had awakened screaming.
That's good. I got goosebumps.
Thank you, sir. And he was vaguely aware of someone pounding on the wall, but by then he was already pelting into the bathroom, and he barely made it to the kneeling.
Penitential.
Thank you. He was already pelting into the bathroom, and he barely made it into the kneeling penitential position before the porcelain altar before dinner came up the express elevator. It came special delivery, hot and steaming and still smelling like processed turkey. He knelt there and looked into the bowl at the chunks of half-digested turkey and the carrots which had lost none of their original fluorescent brightness, and this word flashed across his mind in large red letters. Enough.
Enough.
Correct. It was enough. He was going to get out of the Sawbones business. He was going to get out because enough was enough. He was going to get out because Popeye's motto was,
"That's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more."
and Popeye was as right as rain. He had, oh shit, sorry. Am I in the right place? City in the city? No. There we go. He had flushed the toilet and gone back to bed and fell asleep almost instantly and awoke to discover he still wanted to be a doctor. And that was a goddamn good thing to know for sure. Maybe worth the whole program, whether you called it Emergency Ride or Bucket of Blood or Name That Tune. He still wanted to be a doctor. He knew a lady who did needlework. He paid her $10 he couldn't afford to make him a small, old-fashioned looking sampler. It said, "If you can take this, you can take anything." Yes, correct. The messy business in the subway happened 4 weeks later. 2. "The lady was some fucking weird, you know it?" Julio said. George breathed an interior sigh of relief. If Julio hadn't opened the subject, George supposed he wouldn't have had the sack. He was an intern, and someday he was going to be a full-fledged doc. He really believed that now. But Julio was a vet, and you didn't want to say something stupid in front of a vet. He would only laugh and say, "Hell, I've seen that shit 1,000 times, kid. Get yourself a towel and wipe off whatever it is behind your ears, 'cause it's wet and dripping down the sides of your face." But apparently Julio hadn't seen it 1,000 times, and that was good, because George wanted to talk about it.
She was weird, all right. It was like she was two people.
He was amazed to see that now Julio was the one who looked relieved, and he was struck with sudden shame. Julio Estevez, who was going to do no more than pilot a limo with a couple of pulsing red lights on top for the rest of his life, had just shown more courage than he had been able to show.
Yeah, it's Julio.
All right. You got it, Doc? 100%. He pulled out a pack of Chesterfields and stuck one in the corner of his mouth.
"Those things are gonna kill you, my man."
George said. Julio nodded and offered the pack. They smoked in silence for a while. The Paras were maybe chasing tail like Julio had said, or maybe they just had enough. George had been scared. All right, no joke about that. But he also knew that he had been the one who saved the woman, not the Paras, and he knew Julio knew it too. Maybe that was really why Julio had waited. The old black woman had helped, and the white kid who had dialed the cops while everyone else, except the old black woman, had just stood around watching like it was some goddamn movie or TV show or something. Part of a Peter Gunn episode maybe. But in the end, it had all come down to George Shavers, one scared cat doing his duty the best way he could. The woman had been waiting for the train Duke Ellington held in such high regard. That fabled A train, just been a pretty young black woman in jeans and a khaki shirt, waiting for the fabled A train so she could go uptown someplace. Someone had pushed her. George Shavers didn't have the slightest idea if the police had caught the slug who had done it. That wasn't his business. His business was the woman who had tumbled screaming into the tube of the tunnel in front of that fabled A train. It had been a miracle that she had missed the third rail. The fabled third rail that would have done to her what the state of New York did to the bad guys up at Sing Sing, who got a free ride on that fabled A train the cons called Old Sparky. Oh boy, the miracles of electricity. She tried to crawl out of the way, but there hadn't been quite enough time, and that fabled A train had come into the station screeching and squalling and puking up sparks because the motorman had seen her, but it was too late. Too late for him and too late for her. The steel wheels of that fabled A train had cut the living legs off of her from just above the knees down. And while everyone else, except for the white kid who had dialed the cops, had only stood there pulling their puds, or pushing their pudenda, George supposed. The elderly black woman had jumped down, dislocating one hip in the process. She would later be given a Medal of Bravery by the mayor, and had used the do-rag on her head to cinch a tourniquet around one of the young women's squirting thighs. The young white guy was screaming for an ambulance on one side of the station, and the old black chick was screaming for someone to give her help, to give her a tie-off, for God's sake. Anything at all. And finally, some elderly white business type had reluctantly surrendered his belt. And the elderly black chick looked up at him and spoke the words which became the headline of the New York Daily News the next day. The words which made her an authentic American apple pie heroine.
Thank you, bro.
Then she had noosed the belt around the young woman's left leg, halfway between the young woman's crotch and where her left knee had been until that fabled A train had come along. George had heard someone say to someone else that the young black woman's last words before passing out had been, "Who was that motherfucker? I ain't gonna hunt him down and kill his ass." There was no way to punch holes far enough up for the elderly black woman to notch the belt. So she simply held it on like grim old death until Julio, George, and the Paras arrived. George remembered the yellow line, how his mother had told him he must never go past the yellow line while he was waiting for a train, fabled or otherwise. The stench of oil and electricity when he hopped down onto the cinders, remembered how hot it had been. The heat seemed to be baking off him, off the elderly black woman, off the young black woman, off the train, the tunnel, the unseen sky above, and hell itself beneath. He remembered thinking incoherently, if they put
a blood pressure cuff on me now, I'd go off the dial.
And then he went cool and yelled for his bag. And when one of the Paras tried to jump down with it, he told the para to fuck off. And the para had looked startled. as if he was really seeing George Shavers for the first time. And he had fucked off. George tied off as many veins and arteries as he could tie off, and when her heart started to bebop, he had shot her full of digitalin. Whole blood arrived. Cots brought it. Want to bring her up, Doc? Oh, sorry. One of them had asked, and George had told him, not yet. And he got out of the needle and stuck the juice to her like she was a junkie in dire need of a fix. Then he let them take her up. Then they had taken her back. On the way, she had awakened. Then the weirdness started. 3. This is going to be a little confusing right here.
I think we can do it.
Yep. Nail it. George gave her a shot of Demerol when the Perez loaded her into the ambulance. She had begun to stir and cry out weakly. He gave her a boost hefty enough for him to be confident she would remain quiet until they got to Sisters of Mercy. He was 90% sure she would still be with them when they got there, and that was one for the good guys. Her eyes began to flutter while they were still 6 blocks from the hospital, however. She uttered a thick moan.
We can shoot her up again, Doc.
One of the Perez said. George was hardly aware this was the first time a paramedic had deigned to call him anything other than George, or worse, Georgie.
Are you nuts? I just assume not confuse DOA and OD if that's the same to you.
The paramedic drew back. George looked back at the young black woman and saw the eyes returning his gaze were awake and aware. What has happened to me? She asked. George remembered the man who had told another man about what the woman had supposedly said. How she was going to hunt the motherfucker down and kill his ass, etc., etc. That man had been white. George decided now it had been pure invention. Inspired either by that odd human urge to make naturally dramatic situations even more dramatic, or just race prejudice. This was a cultured, intelligent woman.
You've had an accident,
he said.
Her
eyes slipped shut and he thought she was going to sleep again. Good. Let someone else tell her she had lost her legs. Someone who made more than $7,600 a year. He had shifted a little to the left, wanting to check her BP again. When she opened her eyes once more... Oh, sorry. He had shifted a little to the left, wanting to check her BP again, when she opened her eyes once more. When she did, George Shavers was looking at a different woman. Fucker cut off my legs! I thought him go. This ambulance?
Yes.
George said. Suddenly he needed something to drink. Not necessarily alcohol, just something wet. His voice was dry. This was like watching Spencer Tracy and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, only for real. To get that honky motherfucker?
No.
George said, thinking.
The guy got it right. God damn. Guy actually did get it right.
He was vaguely aware that the paramedics, who had been hovering, perhaps hoping he would do something wrong, were now backing off. Good. Honky Fuzz gonna be letting him off anyway. I'll be getting him. I'll be cutting his cock off, some bitch. I tell you what I'm gonna do to that some bitch. I'll tell you one thing that you some bitch honky. I gonna tell you, tell. Her eyes fluttered again, and George had thought,
Go to sleep. Please go to sleep. I don't get paid for this. I don't understand this. They told us about shock, but nobody mentioned schizophrenia as one of the...
The eyes opened. The first woman was there. What sort of accident was it? She asked. I remember coming out of the...
I?
He said stupidly. She smiled a little. It was a painful smile. The Hungry Eye. It's a coffee house.
Oh. Yeah. Right.
The other one, hurt or not, had made him feel dirty and a little ill. This one made him feel like a knight in an Arthurian tale. A knight who successfully rescued the Lady Fair from the jaws of the dragon. I remember walking down the stairs to the platform, and after that...
Someone pushed you.
It sounded stupid. But what was wrong with that? It was stupid. Pushed me in front of the train?
Yes.
Have I lost my legs? George tried to swallow and couldn't. There seemed to be nothing in his throat to grease the machinery.
Not all of them.
He said inanely, and her eyes closed.
Let it be a feint.
He thought then.
Please let it be a...
They opened, blazing, one hand coming up and slashed 5 slits across the air within an inch of his face. Any closer and he would have been in the ER getting his cheek stitched up instead of smoking chesties with Julio Estevez. You ain't nothing but a bunch of honky sons of bitches, she screamed. Her face was monstrous, her eyes full of hell's own light. It wasn't even the face of a human being. Gonna kill every motherfucking honky I see. Gonna get them first. Gonna cut off their balls and spit in them. Spit in their faces. Gone. It was crazy. She talked like a cartoon black woman, Butterfly McQueen gone Looney Tunes. She, or it, also seemed superhuman. This screaming, writhing thing could not have just undergone impromptu surgery by subway train half an hour ago. She bit. She clawed out at him again and again. Snot spat from her nose, spit flew from her lips, filth poured from her mouth.
Up, Doc!
One of the paras yelled. His face was pale.
For Christ's sake, shoot her up!
The para reached toward the supply case. George shoved his hand inside. Fuck off, chicken shit! That's good.
No, that was
George,
me.
yeah, it was you.
Okay.
It was just perfectly timed. George looked back at his patient and saw the calm, cultured eyes of the other one looking at him. Will I live? She asked in a conversational tea room voice, he thought.
She is unaware of her lapses. Totally unaware.
And after a moment,
So is the other one, for that matter.
he gulped, rubbed at his galloping heart through his tunic, and then ordered himself to get control of this. He had saved her life. Her mental problems were not his concerns. Are you all right? She asked him, and the genuine concern in her voice made him smile a little. Her asking him,
Yes, ma'am.
to which question are you responding? For a moment he didn't understand, then did.
Both.
He said, and took her hand. She squeezed it, and he looked into her shining, lucent eyes and thought,
A man could fall in love.
and that was when her hand turned into a claw, and she was telling him he was a honky muffa, and she hadn't just gone take his balls. She wasn't just going to take his balls, she was going to chew on those motherfuckers. He pulled away, looking to see if his hand was bleeding, thinking incoherently that if it was, he would have to do something about it, because she was poison. The woman was poison, and being bitten by her would be about the same as being bitten by a copperhead or rattler. There was no blood, and when he looked again, it was the other woman, the first woman. Please, she said, I don't want to die. Then she went out for good, and that was good for all of them. 4. So what you think? Julio asked.
About who's going to be in the series?
George squashed the butt under the heel of his loafer.
White Sox. I got them in the pool.
What you think about that lady?
I think she might be schizophrenic.
George said slowly. Yeah, I know that. I mean, What's gonna happen to her?
I don't know.
She needs help, man. Who gonna give it?
Well, I already gave her one.
George said, but his face felt hot, as if he were blushing. Julio looked at him. If you already gave her all the help you can give her, you should have let her die, Doc. George looked at Julio for a moment, but found he couldn't stand what he saw in Julio's eyes. Not accusation, but sadness. So he walked away. He had places to go. 5. The time of the drawing. In the time since the accident, it was, for the most part, still Odetta Holmes who was in control. But Detta Walker had come forward more and more. The thing Detta liked to do best was steal. It didn't matter that her booty was always a little more than junk. No more than it mattered that she often threw it away later. The taking was what mattered. When the gunslinger entered her head in Macy's, Detta screamed in a combination of fury and horror and terror. Her hands freezing on the junk jewelry was scooping into her purse. She screamed because when Roland came into her mind, when he came forward, she for a moment sensed the other. As if a door had been swung open inside her head, and she screamed because the invading, raping presence was a honky. She could not see, but nonetheless sensed his whiteness. People looked around. The floor walker saw the screaming woman in the wheelchair with her purse open, saw one hand frozen in the act of stuffing costume jewelry into a purse that looked, even from a distance of 30 feet, worth 3 times the stuff she was stealing. The floor walker yelled,
Hey, Jimmy!
And Jimmy Halverson, one of
the department stores.
Yeah. No. All right.
Hey, Jimmy!
And Jimmy Halverson, one of Macy's house detectives, looked around and saw what was happening. He started toward the black woman in the wheelchair on a dead run. He couldn't help running. He had been a city cop for 18 years and it was built into his system. But he was already thinking it was going to be a shit bust. Little kids, cripples, nuns, they were always a shit bust. Busting them was like kicking a drunk. They cried a little in front of the judge and then took a walk. It was hard to convince judges that cripples could also be slime. But he ran just the same. 6. Roland was momentarily horrified by the snake pit of hate and revulsion in which he found himself. And then he heard the woman screaming, saw the big man with the potato sack belly running toward her. Him, saw people looking and took control. Suddenly, he was the woman with the dusky hands. He sensed some strange duality inside her, but couldn't think about it now. He turned the chair and began to shove it forward. The aisle rolled past her. People dived away to either side. The purse was lost, spilling Detta's credentials and stolen treasure in a wide trail along the floor. The man with the heavy guts skidded on bogus gold chains and lipstick tubes, and then fell on his ass. 7.
Oh, sorry. Shit!
Halverson thought furiously, and for a moment one hand clawed under his sport coat where there was a .38 caliber in a clamshell holster. The insanity reasserted itself. This was no drug bust or armed robbery. This was a crippled black lady in a wheelchair. She was rolling it like it was some punk's drag racer, but a crippled black lady was all she was, just the same. What was he gonna do? Shoot her? That would be great, wouldn't it? And where was he gonna go? Where was she gonna go? There was nothing at the end of the aisle but 2 dressing rooms. He picked himself up, massaging his aching ass, and began after her again, limping a little now. The wheelchair flashed into one of the dressing rooms. The door slammed, just clearing the push handles on the back.
Oh, you know, bitch.
Jimmy thought.
and I'm gonna give you one hell of a scare. I don't care if you got 5 orphan children and only a year to live. I'm not gonna hurt you, but oh, babe, I'm gonna shake your dice.
Thank you, Napoleon. He beat the floor walker to the dressing room, slammed the door open with his left shoulder. Then it was empty. No black woman, no wheelchair, no nothing. He looked at the floor walker starry-eyed.
Other one!
The floor walker yelled.
Other one!
Before Jimmy could move, the floor walker had busted open the door of the other dressing room. A woman in a linen skirt and a Playtex living bra screamed piercingly and crossed her arms over her chest. She was very white and very definitely not crippled.
Pardon me.
The floor walker said, feeling hot crimson flood his face. Get out of here, you pervert! The woman in the linen skirt and the bra cried.
Yes, ma'am.
The floor walker said and closed the door. At Macy's, the customer was always right. He looked at Halverson. Halverson looked back.
What is this shit?
Halverson asked.
Did she go in there or not?
Yeah, she did.
So where is she?
The floor walker could only shake his head. Let's go back and pick up the mess,
You pick up the mess.
Jimmy Halverson said.
I feel like I just broke my ass in 9 pieces.
He paused.
To tell you the truth, my fine bucko, I also feel extremely confused.
8. The moment the gunslinger heard the dressing room door bang shut behind them, he rammed the wheelchair around in a half turn, looking for the doorway. If Eddie had done what he had promised, it would be gone. But the door was open. Roland wheeled the Lady of Shadows through it. Chapter 3. Making pretty good time.
You want to go for it?
Let me see. I gotta move my bookmark.
It'll be at least an hour.
At least an hour? Yeah, I can do that.
At least an hour. But it's not. It's not hard anymore. I don't think.
No, I
A
don't
couple
think
of
it's
places
hard.
Where it gets difficult as far as like switching between Odetta and Detta. But
Yeah.
if you want to go for it, I'm cool to go for it. You want to take a quick break?
Yeah, I need to get some drink because I...
Yeah, I could get up and walk around for a sec.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind saying please on that one.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
So let me go back. All right, be right back, everybody. Enjoy the, let's see. Enjoy the New Orleans Noir. Or no, Down by the Sea. Just relax. Take some nice deep breaths in. Grab a drink of your own. Be right back.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. Chapter 3. Odetta on the Other Side. 1. Not long after, Roland would think any other woman, crippled or otherwise, suddenly shoved all the way down the aisle of the mart in which she was doing business. Monkey business. You may call it off if you like. You may call it if you like. By a stranger inside her head, shoved into a little room while some man behind her yelled for her to stop. Then suddenly turned, shoved again where there was by no rights no room in which to shove, then finding herself suddenly in an entirely different world. I think any other woman, under those circumstances, would have most certainly have asked, "Where am I?" before all else. Instead, Odetta Holmes asked almost pleasantly, What exactly are you planning to do with that knife, young man?" 2. Roland looked up at Eddie, who was crouching with his knife held less than a quarter of an inch over the skin. Even with his uncanny speed, there was no way the gunslinger could move fast enough to evade the blade if Eddie decided to use it. Yes, Roland said. What are you planning to do with it?
I don't know.
Eddie said, sounding completely disgusted with himself.
Cut bait, I guess. Sure doesn't look like I came here to fish, does it?
He threw the knife toward the lady's chair, but well to the right. It stuck, quivering in the sand to its hilt. Then the lady turned her head and began, I wonder if you could please explain where you've taken... She stopped. She had said, I wonder if you, before her head had gotten around far enough to see there was no one behind her. But the gunslinger observed with some real interest that she went on speaking for a moment anyway, because the fact of her condition made certain things elementary truths of her life. If she had moved, for instance, someone must have moved her, but there was no one behind her, no one at all. She looked back at Eddie and the gunslinger, her dark eyes troubled, confused, and alarmed, and now she asked, Where am I? Who pushed me? How can I be here? How can I be dressed? For that matter, when I was home watching the 12 o'clock news in my robe. Who am I? Where is this? Who are you? Who am I? She asked. The gunslinger thought. Dam broke and there was a flood of questions. That was to be expected. But that one question, who am I? Even now, I don't think she knows she asked it. Or when. Because she had asked before. Even before she had asked who they were, she had asked who she was. 3. Eddie looked from the lovely young old face of the black woman in the wheelchair to Roland's face.
Come she doesn't know.
Can't say. Shock, I suppose.
Shock took her all the way back to her living room before she left for Macy's? You telling me the last thing she remembers is sitting in a bathrobe and listening to some blow-dried dude talk about how they found that gonzo down in the Florida Keys with Kristen McAuliffe's left hand mounted on his den wall next to his prized marlin?
Roland didn't answer. More dazed than ever, the lady said, Who is Kristen McAuliffe? Is she one of the missing Freedom Riders? Now it was Eddie's turn not to answer. Freedom Riders? What the hell were they? The gunslinger glanced at him and Eddie was able to read his eyes easily enough. Can't you see she's in shock?
I know what you mean, Roland, old buddy. But it only washes up to a point. I felt a little shock myself when you came busting into my head like Walter Payton on crack. But it didn't wipe out my memory banks.
Speaking of shock, he had gotten another pretty good jolt when she came through. He had been kneeling over Roland's inert body, the knife just above the vulnerable skin of the throat. But the truth was, Eddie couldn't have used the knife anyway. Not then, anyway. He was staring into the doorway, hypnotized. As an aisle of Macy's rushed forward, he was reminded again of The Shining, where you saw what the little boy was screaming at,
Yes.
He was reminded again of The Shining, where you saw what the little boy was seeing as he rode his trike through the hallways of that haunted hotel. He remembered the little boy had seen this creepy pair of dead twins in one of those hallways. The end of this aisle was much more mundane, a white door. The words, "Only 2 garments at one time, please," were printed on it in discreet lettering. Yeah, it was Macy's all right. Macy's for sure. One black hand flew out and slammed the door open while the male voice, a cop voice if Eddie had ever heard one, and he had heard many in his time behind, yelled for her to quit it. That was no way out. She was only making things a hell of a lot worse for herself, and Eddie caught a bare glimpse of the black woman in the wheelchair in the mirror to the left, and he remembered thinking,
Jesus, he's got her all right. But she sure don't look happy about it.
Then the view pivoted and Eddie was looking at himself. The view rushed toward the viewer and he wanted to put up the hand holding the knife to shield his eyes, because all at once the sensation of looking through two sets of eyes was too much, too crazy. It was going to drive him crazy if he didn't shut it out, but it all happened too fast for him to have time. The wheelchair came through the door. It was a tight fit. Eddie heard its hubs squeal on the sides. At the same moment, he heard another sound, a thick, tearing sound that made him think of some word, placental, that he couldn't quite think of because he didn't know he knew it. Then the woman was rolling toward him on the hard-packed sand, and she no longer looked mad as hell, hardly looked like the woman Eddie had glimpsed in the mirror at all, for that matter. But he supposed that wasn't surprising. When you all at once went from a changing room at Macy's to the seashore of a godforsaken world where some of the lobsters were the size of small collie dogs, it left you feeling a little winded. That was a subject on which Eddie Dean felt he could personally give testimony. She rolled about 4 feet before stopping, and only went that far because of the slope and the gritty pack of the sand. Her hands were no longer pumping the wheels as they must have been doing.
If we're so short tomorrow, you can blame it on Sir Roland, lady.
Eddie thought sourly. Instead, they went to the arms of the chair and gripped them as she regarded the two men. Behind her, the doorway had already disappeared. Disappeared? That was not quite right. It seemed to fold in on itself, like a piece of film run backward. This began to happen just as the shore dick came slamming through the other, more mundane door. The one between the store and the dressing room. He was coming hard, expecting the shoplifter would have locked the door, and Eddie thought he was going to take one hell of a splat against the far wall. But Eddie was never going to see it happen, or not happen. Before the shrinking space where the door between that world and this disappeared entirely, Eddie saw everything on that side freeze solid. The movie had become a still photograph. All that remained now were the dual tracks of the wheelchair, starting in sandy nowhere and running 4 feet to where it and its occupant now sat. "Won't somebody please explain where I am and how I got here?" the woman in the wheelchair asked, almost pleaded.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Dorothy.
Eddie said.
You ain't in Kansas anymore.
The woman's eyes brimmed with tears. Eddie could see her trying to hold them in, but it was no good. She began to sob. Furious and disgusted with himself as well, Eddie turned on the gunslinger, who had staggered to his feet. Roland moved, but not toward the weeping lady. Instead, he went to pick up his knife.
Tell her.
Eddie shouted.
You brought her, so go on and tell her, man.
And after a moment, he added in a lower tone.
And then tell me how come she doesn't remember herself.
4. Roland did not respond. Not at once. He bent, pinched the hilt of the knife between the two remaining fingers of his right hand, transferred it carefully to his left, and slipped it into the scabbard at the side of one gun belt. He was still trying to grapple with what he had sensed in the lady's mind. Unlike Eddie, she had fought him like a cat. From the moment he came forward until they rolled through the door, the fight had begun the moment she sensed him. There had been no lapse, because there had been no surprise. He had experienced it, but didn't in the least understand it. No surprise at the invading stranger in her mind, only the instant rage, terror, and the commencement of a battle to shake him free. She hadn't come close to winning that battle. Could not. He suspected. But that hadn't kept her from trying like hell. He had felt a woman insane with fear and anger and hate. He had sensed only darkness in her. This was a mind entombed in a cave-in. Except that in the moment they burst through the doorway and separated, he had wished desperately that he could tarry a moment longer. One moment would have told so much, because the woman before them now wasn't the woman in whose mind he had been. Being in Eddie's mind had been like being in a room with jittery, sweating walls. Being in the lady's head had been like lying naked in the dark while venomous snakes crawled all over you. Until the end. She had changed at the end, and there had been something else. Something he believed was vitally important, but he either could not understand it or remember it. Something like a glance. The doorway itself, only in her mind, something about, you broke the 4 special, it was you. Is that Detta talking?
That one's Odetta. You broke the 4 special. It was you.
Some sudden burst of understanding as it studies when he finally saw.
Oh, fuck you.
Eddie said disgustedly.
You're nothing but a goddamn machine.
He strode past Roland, went to the woman, knelt beside her, and when she put her arms around him, panic tight, like the arms of a drowning swimmer, he did not draw away, but put his own arms around her and hugged her back.
It's okay,
he said.
I mean, it's not great, but it's okay.
Where are we? She wept. I was sitting home watching TV so I could hear if my friends got out of Oxford alive, and now I'm here and I don't even know where here is.
Well, neither do I,
Eddie said, holding her tighter, beginning to rock her a little.
But I guess we're in it together. I'm from where you're from, little old New York City. And we've been through the same thing. Well, a little different, but the same principle. And you're gonna be just fine.
As an afterthought, he added,
As long as you like lobster.
She hugged him and wept, and Eddie held her and rocked her, and Roland thought, Eddie will be all right now. His brother's dead, but he has someone else to take care of, so Eddie will be all right now. But he felt a pang, a deep, reproachful hurt in his heart. He was capable of shooting, with his left hand anyway, of killing, of going on, slamming with brutal relentlessness through miles and years, even dimensions, it seemed, in search of the tower. He was capable of survival, sometimes even of protection. He had saved the boy Jake from a slow death at the way station, and from sexual consumption by the Oracle at the foot of the mountains. But in the end, he had let Jake die. Nor had this been by accident. He had committed a conscious act of damnation. He watched the two of them, watched Eddie hug her, assure her it was going to be all right. He could not have done that, and now the rue in his heart was joined by stealthy fear. Who is this speaking? Is this the man in black?
Maybe, yeah.
If you have given up your heart for the tower, Roland, you have already lost. A heartless creature is a loveless creature, and a loveless creature is a beast. To be a beast is perhaps bearable, although the man who has become one will surely pay hell's own price in the end. But what if you should gain your object? What if you should, heartless, actually storm the Dark Tower and win it? If there is naught but darkness in your heart, what could you do except degenerate from beast to monster? To gain one's object as a beast would only be bitterly comic. like giving a magnifying glass to an elephant, but to gain one's object as a monster. To pay hell is one thing, but do you want to own it? He thought of Allie and of the girl who had once waited for him at the window. Thought of the tears he had shed over Cuthbert's lifeless corpse. Oh, then he had loved. Yes, then. I do want to love, he cried, but although Eddie was also crying a little now with the woman in the wheelchair, the gunslinger's eyes remained as dry as the desert he had crossed to reach this sunless sea. 5. He would answer Eddie's question later. He would do that because he thought Eddie would do well to be on guard. The reason she didn't remember was simple. She wasn't one woman, but two, and one of them was dangerous. 6. Eddie told her what he could, glossing over the shootout, but being truthful about everything else. When he was done, she remained perfectly silent for some time, her hands clasped together on her lap. Little streamlets coursed down from the shallowing mountains, petering out some miles to the east. It was from these that Roland and Eddie had drawn their water as they hiked north. At first, Eddie had gotten it because Roland was too weak. Later, they had taken turns, always having to go a little farther and search a little longer before finding a stream. They grew steadily more listless as the mountains slumped, but the water hadn't made them sick, so far. Roland had gone yesterday, and although that made today Eddie's turn, the gunslinger had gone again, shouldering the hide water skins and walking off without a word. Eddie found this queerly discreet. He didn't want to be touched by the gesture. By anything about Roland, for that matter. And found he was, a little, just the same. She listened attentively to Eddie, not speaking at all, her eyes fixed on his. At one moment, Eddie would guess she was 5 years older than he. At another, he would guess 15. There was one thing he didn't have to guess about. He was falling in love with her. When he had finished, she sat for a moment without saying anything. Now, not looking at him, but beyond him. Looking at the waves which would, at nightfall, bring the lobsters, and with their alien lawyerly questions. He had been particularly careful to describe them. Better for her to be a little scared now than a lot scared when they came out to play. He supposed she wouldn't want to eat them, not after hearing what they had done to Roland's hand and foot. Not after she got a good close look at them. But eventually, hunger would win out over a dead chick and dumb a chum. Her eyes were far and distant.
Odetta.
He asked after perhaps 5 minutes had gone by. She had told him her name, Odetta Holmes. He thought it was a gorgeous name. She looked back at him, startled out of her reverie. She smiled a little. She said one word. No. He only looked at her, able to think of no suitable reply. He thought he had never understood until that moment how eliminable a simple negative could be.
Understand.
He said finally.
What are you knowing?
All this. Odetta swept an arm. She had, he'd noticed, very strong arms, smooth but very strong, indicating the sea, the sky, the beach, the scruffy foothills where the gunslinger was now presumably searching for water, or maybe getting eaten alive by some new and interesting monster, something Eddie didn't really care to think about. Indicating, in short, this entire world.
I understand how you feel. I had a pretty good case of the unrealities myself at first.
But had he? Looking back, it seemed he had simply accepted, perhaps because he was sick. shaking himself apart in his need for junk.
You get over it.
No, she said again. I believe one of the two things has happened. And no matter which one it is, I'm still in Oxford, Mississippi. None of this is real. She went on. She went on. If her voice had been louder, shit.
Drink some water.
Stretch out my vocal cords. L'chaim.
L'chaim. I feel like if I had a tablet, you know, I could like scroll
Yeah.
with the tablet.
Do like the
It'd be a
Kindle?
lot easier to have it like up here
Yeah.
than it is like down here.
I gotta have it like close. That way my view's able to catch more things peripherally.
Yes, like I've got it like right here. It's down and like under the mic,
Yeah.
so I can like lean into it. But it's hard to hold it up the whole time, you know.
It is. It is.
Sorry.
No. You're good. She went on. If her voice had been louder, or perhaps if he had not been falling in love, it would almost have been a lecture. As it was, it sounded more like a lyric than lecture.
Except
He had to keep reminding himself.
bullshit's what it really is, and you have to convince her of that for her sake.
I may have sustained a head injury, she said. They are notorious swingers of axe handles and billy clubs in Oxford Town. Oxford Town. That produced a faint chord of recognition far back in Eddie's mind. She said the words in a kind of rhythm that he, for some reason, associated with Henry. Henry and wet diapers. Why? What? Didn't matter now.
You're trying to tell me you think this is all some sort of dream you're having while you're unconscious?
Or in a coma, she said. And you needn't look at me as though you thought it was preposterous, because it isn't. Look here. She parted her hair carefully on the left, and Eddie could see she wore it to one side, not just because she liked the style. The old wound beneath the fall of her hair was scarred and ugly. Not brown, but a grayish white,
I guess you've had a lot of hard luck in your time.
he said. She shrugged impatiently. A lot of hard luck and a lot of soft living, she said. Maybe it all balances out. I only showed you because I was in a coma for 3 weeks when I was 5. I dreamed a lot then. I can't remember what the dreams were, but I remember my mama said they knew I wasn't gonna die just as long as I kept talking. And it seemed like I kept talking all the time. Although she said they couldn't make out one word in a dozen. I do remember that the dreams were very vivid. She paused, looking around. As vivid as this place seems to be. And you, Eddie. When she said his name, his arms prickled. Oh, he had it all right. He had it bad. And him, she shivered. He seems the most vivid of all.
We ought to. I mean, we are real, no matter what you think.
She gave him a kind smile. It was utterly without belief.
How did that happen?
He asked.
That thing on your head.
It doesn't matter. I'm just making the point that what has happened once might very well happen again.
No, but I'm curious.
I was struck by a brick. It was our first trip north. We came to the town of Elizabeth, New Jersey. We came in the Jim Crow car.
What's that?
She looked at him unbelievingly, almost scornfully. Where have you been living, Eddie? In a bomb shelter?
I'm from a different time.
He said.
Could I ask how old you are, Odetta?
Old enough to vote and not old enough for Social Security.
Well, I guess that puts me in my place.
But gently, I hope, she said and smiled that radiant smile which made his arms prickle.
I'm 23,
He said.
but I was born in 1964, the year you were living in when Roland took you.
That's rubbish.
No, I was living in 1987 when he took me.
Well, she said after a moment, that certainly adds a great deal to your argument for this is reality, Eddie.
The Jim Crow car. Was it where the black people had to stay?
The Negroes, she said. Calling a Negro a black is a trifle rude, don't you think?
You'll all be calling yourselves that by 1980 or so.
Eddie said.
When I was a kid, calling a black kid a Negro was apt to get you in a fight. Almost as bad as calling that other word.
Sweet. She looked at him uncertainly for a moment. Then shook her head again.
Tell me about the brick then.
My mother's youngest sisters was going to be married, Odetta said. Her name was Sophia, but my mother always called her Sister Blue because it was the color she always fancied. Or at least she fancied to fancy it, was how my mother put it. So I always called her Aunt Blue. Even before I met her, it was the most lovely wedding. There was a reception afterward. I remember all the presents. She laughed.
I know.
Presents always look so wonderful to a child, don't they, Eddie? He smiled.
Yeah, you got that right. You never forget presents. Not what they got you, not what somebody else got either.
My father had begun to make money by then, but all I knew is that we were getting ahead. That's what my mother always called it. And once, when I told her a little girl I played with had asked if my daddy was rich, my mother told me that was what I was supposed to say if any other of my other chums ever asked me that question. That we were getting ahead. So they were able to give Aunt Blue a lovely china set, and I remember, her voice faltered, one hand rose to her temple and rubbed absently, as if a headache were beginning there.
Remember what, Odetta?
I remember my mother gave her a 4 special.
What?
I'm sorry, I've got a headache. It's got my tongue tangled. I don't know why I'm bothering to tell you all this anyway.
Do you mind?
No, I don't mind. I meant to say Mother gave her a special plate. It was white, with delicate blue trace work woven all around the rim. Odetta smiled a little. Eddie didn't think it was an entirely comfortable smile. Something about this memory disturbed her, and the way its immediacy seemed to have taken precedence over the extremely strange situation she had found herself in, a situation which should be claiming all or most of her attention, disturbed him. I can see that plate as clearly as I can see you now, Eddie. My mother gave it to Aunt Blue, and she cried and cried over it. I think she'd seen a plate like that once when she and my mother were children. Only, of course, their parents could never have afforded such a thing. There was none of them who got anything for special as kids. After the reception, Aunt Blue and her husband left for the Great Smokies on their honeymoon. They went on the train. She looked at Eddie.
In the Jim Crow car.
He said, "That's right, in the Crow car. In those days, that's what Negroes rode in and where they ate. That's what we're trying to change in Oxford Town. She looked at him, almost surely expecting him to insist she was here. But he was caught in the webwork of his own memory again. Wet diapers and those words. Oxford Town. Only suddenly other words came, just a little line. But he could remember Henry singing it over and over until his mother asked if he couldn't please stop so she could hear Walter Cronkite. Somebody better investigate soon. Those were the words, sung over and over by Henry in a nasal monotone. Okay. Somebody better investigate soon. Those were the words, sung over and over by Henry in a nasal monotone. He tried for more but couldn't get it. And was that any real surprise? He could have been no more than 3 at the time. Somebody better investigate soon. The words gave him a chill. Eddie, are you all right?
Yes? Why?
You shivered. He smiled.
Donald Duck must have walked over my grave.
She laughed. Anyway, at least I didn't spoil the wedding. It happened when we were walking back to the railway station. We stayed the night with a friend of Aunt Blue's, and in the morning my father called a taxi. The taxi came almost right away, but when the driver saw we were colored, he drove off like his head was on fire and his ass was catching. Aunt Blue's friend had already gone ahead to the depot with our luggage. There was a lot of it, because we were going to spend the week in New York. I remember my father saying he couldn't wait to see my face light up when the clock in Central Park struck the hour and all the animals danced. My father said we might as well walk to the station. My mother agreed just as fast as lickety-split, saying that was a fine idea. It wasn't but a mile, and it would be nice to stretch our legs after 3 days on one train, just behind us and a half day on another one just ahead of us. My father said yes, and it was gorgeous weather besides, but I think I knew even at 5 that he was mad, and she was embarrassed, and both of them were afraid to call another taxi cab because the same thing might happen again. So we went on walking down the street. I was on the inside because my mother was afraid of me getting too close to the traffic. I remember wondering if my daddy meant my face would actually start to glow or something when I saw that clock in Central Park. And if that might not hurt. And that was when the brick came down on my head. Everything went dark for a while. Then the dreams started. Vivid dreams. She smiled. Like this dream, Eddie.
Did the brick fall, or did someone bomb you?
They never found anyone. The police, my mother told me this long after, when I was 16 or so, found the place where they thought the brick had been. But there were other bricks missing, and more were loose. It was just outside the window of a 4th floor room in an apartment building that had been condemned. But of course, there were lots of people staying there just the same, especially at night.
Sure,
Eddie said. No one saw anyone leaving the building, so it went down as an accident. My mother said she thought it had been, but I think she was lying. She didn't even bother trying to tell me what my father thought. They were both still smarting over how the cab driver had taken one look at us and driven off. It was that more than anything else that made them believe someone had been up there, just looking out and saw us coming, and decided to drop a brick on the black people. Will your lobster creatures come out soon?
No,
Eddie said.
not until dusk. So one of your ideas is that all of this is a coma dream, like the ones you had when you got popped by a brick. Only this time you think it was a billy club or something.
Yes.
What's the other one?
Odetta's face and voice were calm enough, but her head was filled with an ugly skein of images which all added up to Oxford Town, Oxford Town. How did the song go? 2 men killed by the light of the moon. Somebody better investigate soon. Not quite right, but it was
Do you know that
close. No, I don't. It just sounded good.
Yeah, it sounded great.
Close. I may have gone insane, she said. 7. How far we got? Oh shit, we're blowing through this pretty quick.
Actually, yeah.
The first words which came into Eddie's mind were
If you think you've gone insane, Odetta, you're nuts.
brief consideration, however, made this seem an unprofitable line of argument to take. Instead, he remained silent for a time, sitting by her wheelchair, his knees drawn up, his hands holding his wrists. Were you really a heroin addict?
Damn.
He said.
It's like being an alcoholic or basic. It's not a thing you get over. I used to hear that and go, yeah, right, in my head, you know? But now I understand. I still want it, and I guess part of me always want it. But the physical part is past.
What's basin? She asked.
Something that hasn't been invented in your win. It's something you do with cocaine, only it's like turning TNT into an A-bomb.
You did it?
Christ, no. Heroin was my thing, I told you.
You don't seem like an addict, she said. Eddie actually was fairly spiffy. If, that was, one ignored the gamey smell arising from his body and clothes. He could rinse himself and did, could rinse his clothes and did, but lacking soap, he could not really wash either. His hair had been short when Roland stepped into his life. The better to sail through customs, my dear. And what a great big joke that had turned out to be. And was still a respectable length. He shaved every morning using the keen edge of Roland's knife, gingerly at first, but with increasing confidence. He'd been too young for shaving to be part of his life when Henry left for Nam, and it hadn't been any big deal to Henry back then either. He never grew a beard, but sometimes went 3 or 4 days before Mom nagged him into mowing the stubble. Mowing the stubble! When he came back, however, Henry was a maniac on the subject, as he was on a few others. Foot powder after showering, teeth to be brushed 3 or 4 times a day, and followed by a chaser of mouthwash, clothes always hung up, and he turned Eddie into a fanatic as well. The stubble was mowed every morning and every evening. Now this habit was deep in his grain, like the others Henry had taught him, including, of course, the one you took care of with a needle.
Too clean cut?
He asked her, grinning. Too white, she said shortly, and then was quiet for a moment, looking sternly out at the sea. Eddie was quiet too. If there was a comeback to something like that, he didn't know what it was. I'm sorry, she said. That was very unkind, very unfair, and very unlike me.
It's all right.
It's not. It's like a white person saying something like, geez, I never would have guessed you were a derogatory black word to someone with a very light skin.
You like to think of yourself as more fair-minded.
Eddie said. What we like to think of ourselves and what we really are rarely have much in common. What we like to think of ourselves and what we really are rarely have much in common, I should think, but yes. I like to think of myself as more fair-minded, so please accept my apology, Eddie.
On one condition.
What's that? She was smiling a little again. That was good. He liked it when he was able to make her smile.
Give this a fair chance. That's the condition.
Give what a fair chance? She sounded slightly amused. Eddie might have bristled at the tone in someone else's voice, might have felt he was getting boned. But with her, it was different. With her, it was all right. He supposed with her just about anything would have been.
That there's a third alternative. That this really is happening. I mean,
Eddie cleared his throat.
I'm not very good at this philosophical shit. Or, metamorphosis, or whatever the hell you call it.
Do you mean metaphysics?
Maybe. I don't know. I think so. But I know you can't go around disbelieving what your senses tell you. Why, if your idea about all this being a dream is right,
I didn't say a dream.
whatever you said, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? A false reality?
If there had been something faintly condescending in her voice a moment ago, it was gone now. Philosophy and metaphysics may not be your bag, Eddie, but you must have been a hell of a debater in school.
I was never in debate. That was for hags and wimps, like chess club. What do you mean my bag? What's a bag?
Just something you like. What do you mean? What do you mean?
Uh-huh.
He looked at her for a moment, then shrugged.
Never mind. We could swap slang all day. It's not getting us anyplace. What I'm trying to say is that if it's all a dream, it could be mine, not yours. You could be a figment in my imagination.
Her smile faltered. You? Nobody bopped you.
Nobody bopped you either.
Now her smile was entirely gone. No one that I remember, she corrected with some sharpness.
Me either.
He said.
You told me they're rough in Oxford. Well, those customs guys weren't exactly cheery joy when they couldn't find the dope they were after. One of them could have head-bopped me with the butt of his gun. I could be lying in Bellevue Ward right now, dreaming you and Roland while they write their reports, explaining how, while they were interrogating me, I became violent and had to be subdued.
It's not the same.
Why? Because you're this intelligent, socially active black lady with no legs and I'm just a hype from Co-op City?
He said it with a grin, meaning it as an amiable jape, but she flared at him. I wish you would stop calling me black. He sighed.
Okay, but it's gonna take some getting used to.
You should have been on the debate club anyway,
Fuck.
he said, and the turn of her eyes made him realize again that the difference between them was much wider than color. They were speaking to each other from separate islands. The water between was time. Never mind. The word had gotten her attention.
I don't want to debate you. I want to wake you up to the fact that you are awake. That's all.
I might be able to at least operate provisionally according to the dictates of your third alternative as long as this situation continued to go on, except for one thing. There's a fundamental difference between what happened to you and what happened to me. So fundamental, so large that you haven't seen it.
Then show it to me.
There is no discontinuity in your consciousness. There is a very large one in mine.
I don't understand.
I mean, you can account for all of your time, Odetta said. Your story follows from point to point. The airplane, the incursion by by him. She nodded toward the foothills with clear distaste. The stashing of drugs, the officers who took you into custody, all the rest. It's a fantastic story. It has no missing links. As for myself, I arrived back from Oxford was met by Andrew, my driver, and brought back to my building. I bathed and I wanted to sleep. I was getting a very bad headache, and sleep is the only medicine that is any good for the really bad ones. But it was close on midnight, and I thought I would watch the news first. Some of us had been released, but a good many more were still in the jug when we left. I wanted to find out if their cases had been resolved. I dried off and put on my robe and went into the living room. I turned on the TV news. The newscaster started talking about a speech Khrushchev had just made about the American advisors in Vietnam. He said, we have a film report from," and then he was gone and I was rolling down this beach. "You say you saw me in some sort of magic doorway which is now gone, and that I was in Macy's, and that I was stealing. All of this is preposterous enough, but even if it was so, I could find something better to steal than costume jewelry. I don't wear jewelry."
You better look at your hands again, Odetta.
Eddie said quietly. For a very long time, she looked from the diamond on her left pinky too large and vulgar to be anything but paste, to the large opal on the third finger of her right hand, which was too large and vulgar to be anything but real. "None of this is happening," she repeated firmly.
You sound like a broken record.
He was genuinely angry for the first time.
Every time someone pokes a hole in your neat little story, you just retreat to that none of this is happening shit. You gotta wise up, Detta.
"Don't call me that. I hate that," she burst out so shrilly that Eddie recoiled.
Sorry. Jesus, I didn't know.
"I went from night to day, from undressed to dressed, from my living room to this deserted beach, and what really happened was that some big-bellied redneck deputy hit me upside the head with a club, and that's all."
But your memories don't stop at all.
He said softly. "What?" Uncertain again, or maybe seeing and not wanting to, like with the rings.
If you got whacked in Oxford, how come your memories don't stop there?
"There isn't always a lot of logic to things like this." She was rubbing her temples again. "And now, if it's all the same to you, Eddie, I'd just as soon end the conversation. My headache is back. It's quite bad."
I guess whether or not logic figures in all this depends on what you want to believe. I saw you at Macy's, Odetta. I saw you stealing. You say you don't do things like that, but you also told me you don't wear jewelry. You told me that even though you'd looked down at your hand several times while we were talking. Those rings were there then. But it was as if you couldn't see them until I called your attention to them and made you see them.
"I don't want to talk about it," she shouted. "My head hurts."
All right. But you know where you lost track of time, and it wasn't in Oxford.
"Leave me alone," she said dully. Eddie saw the gunslinger toiling his way back with 2 full water skins, one tied around his waist and the other slung over his shoulders. He looked very tired.
I wish I could help you.
Eddie said.
But to do that, I guess I'd have to be real.
He stood by her for a moment, but her head was bowed, the tips of her fingers steadily massaging her temples. Eddie went to meet Roland. 8.
Sit down.
Eddie took the bags.
You look all in.
"I am. I'm getting sick again." Eddie looked at the gunslinger's flushed cheeks and brow, his cracked lips, and nodded.
I hoped it wouldn't happen, but I'm not that surprised, man. You didn't bat the cycle. Balazar didn't have enough Keflex.
"I don't understand you."
If you don't take the penicillin drug long enough, you don't kill the infection. You just drive it underground. A few days go by and it comes back. We'll need more. But at least there's a door to go. In the meantime, you'll just have to take it easy.
But Eddie was thinking unhappily of Odetta's missing legs and the longer and longer treks it took to find water. He wondered if Roland could have picked a worse time to have a relapse. He supposed it was possible. He just didn't see how.
I have to tell you something about Odetta.
That's her name?
Uh-huh.
It's very lovely, the gunslinger said.
Yeah, I thought so too. What isn't so lovely is the way she feels about this place. She doesn't think she's here.
I know. And she doesn't like me much, does she?
No.
Eddie thought.
But that doesn't keep her from thinking you're one booger of a hallucination.
He didn't say it, only nodded. The reasons are almost the same, the gunslinger said. She's not the woman I brought through, you see. Not at all. Eddie stared, then suddenly nodded, excited. That blurred glimpse in the mirror. That snarling face. The man was right. Jesus Christ, of course he was. That hadn't been Odetta at all. Then he remembered the hands which had gone pawing carelessly through the scarves and had just as carelessly gone about the business of stuffing the junk jewelry into her big purse. Almost, it had seemed, as if she wanted to be caught. The rings had been there. Same rings.
But that doesn't necessarily mean the same hands.
He thought wildly, but that would only hold for a second. He had studied her hands. They were the same, long-fingered and delicate. No, the gunslinger continued. She is not. His blue eyes studied Eddie carefully.
Her hand.
Listen, the gunslinger said, and listen carefully. Our lives may depend on it. Mine because I'm getting sick again, and yours because you have fallen in love with her. Eddie said nothing. She is two women in the same body. She was one woman when I entered her, and another when I returned here. Now Eddie could say nothing. There was something else, something strange, but either I didn't understand it, or I did, and it slipped away. It seemed important. Roland looked past Eddie, looked to the beached wheelchair, standing alone at the end of its short track from nowhere. Then he looked back at Eddie. I understand very little of this, or how such a thing can be, but you must be on your guard. Do you understand that?
Oh, I guess I got cut off. Yes.
Eddie's lungs felt as if they had very little wind in them. He understood, or had, at least, a moviegoer's understanding of the sort of thing the gunslinger was speaking of. But he didn't have the breath to explain. Not yet. He felt as if Roland had kicked all his breath out of him. Good. Because the woman I entered on the other side of the door was as deadly as those lobster things that come out at night. And that brings us to chapter 4, Detta on the Other Side. And we will pick this up next time on The Reading Corner with Can and BLG. I'm trying something.
That's great.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Thank you all so very much for hanging out and listening to us rant and rave and try some of these crazy characters. I'm having a fucking blast with it.
We're not doing horrible.
I don't think we're doing bad. I think we're doing pretty good. Especially with the impromptu like shifts and changes, and it's a lot of fun.
The edits are fun.
They are.
I feel like they're necessary though.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't believe it took away, except for that one that I done. It was kind of distracting, but it didn't take
We
away from the
nailed it.
story. Yeah.
We nailed it.
For those of you that are watching the VOD or live, whichever, we are planning to do more of these table reads, and you said maybe start next book.
Yeah, I think
Try to cast
if we
some
can plan
people.
it, a little bit, we can kind of go through it, and I've already kind of worked it out a little bit. We can take a little bit of the burden off of you, and I can have a way to control the music and
Yeah.
scene sounds.
Okay.
Um,
I know how to. I know how to do that.
I know how to do that too.
Yes. I just gotta hide
but
it and have the sounds in it. So you're doing the same sounds as I'm doing.
no. I will be controlling the sounds,
Yes.
and you will not have them.
Right.
I will be doing them.
Yes. That'll be
Yes.
fun. That'll be a lot.
We will figure it out. I would like to put a little bit more production into it. I'm enjoying this a lot, and like I said, there's a lot of books to go, and I'm having a blast. So we should definitely keep it going.
It's really, really fun. Also, we are doing, along with the reading, in tandem with this, as it says in the description below, we are also doing a book club with the BLG community, and anybody that is welcome, or anybody that wants to, can join us on the _Sneak Thieves channel. I before E, folks.
Yeah, I'm free.
Yeah, we do that every Friday night, as long as no big holidays or whatever. You can hop in our Discord, and you'll be up to date with all the updates on what we're going down with. So yeah, join us. Join in the discussion. Thank you again for listening, and I'm gonna say good night. Good night, Sneak.
Good night.
Goodbye, y'all.